I stood frozen at Denver Airport, my suitcase handle cutting into my palm as the car pulled away without me. The automatic doors slid shut, warmth on the other side, snow biting my face. "Grandma slows us down," my son had said, his words hanging colder than the wind. After co-signing his house, after funding his business, after raising his boy, I was left behind like luggage. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from." It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Snow was falling in thin, spiteful ribbons across the terminal drop-off at Denver International. The wind pushed sharp through Evelyn Grant's wool coat as she stepped carefully out of the SUV, one gloved hand gripping the handle of her worn navy suitcase. The vehicle hadn't even fully stopped before Mark jumped out from the driver's seat, already barking orders. "Come on, we're late. Paige, grab the carry-ons," he snapped, slamming the door behind him. Evelyn looked toward the terminal, blinking through her bifocals. Her breathing was shallow from the cold, but she moved slowly and carefully, unwilling to rush like the others. It was her grandson's graduation trip, Cancun, 4 nights, everything booked and prepaid. Her name was on half of it, but she felt like a footnote. "Mark, wait. I've got the meds in," she started. "We don't have time for this, Mom," Paige interrupted sharply, her heels clacking against the concrete as she strode past. "You should have packed lighter. And why didn't you check in online like we said?" Behind them, Josh hovered, his phone in his hand, eyes darting between his parents and Evelyn. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I can help Grandma." "She slows us down, Josh," Mark snapped, yanking his roller bag upright. "We'll meet her inside if she makes it through security in time." Paige snorted. "If." And just like that, they were gone, disappearing into the automatic doors without a backward glance, swept into the warm chaos of the terminal. Evelyn stood frozen at the curb, her suitcase beside her, the red tag flapping in the wind like a mocking flag. She didn't blink. Her breath steamed out slow, deliberate. Cars moved behind her, honking, luggage rattling across sidewalks. A child cried somewhere, but Evelyn stood still, one mittened hand resting gently on her suitcase, as if it were the only steady thing left in her world. A beat-up Subaru pulled up behind her. The passenger window rolled down. "You always dress like you're heading to church in the snow," Ruth Miller said, leaning across the front seat with that dry smile Evelyn knew too well. "Get in, sweetheart." Evelyn hesitated only a second before lifting her suitcase into the back. As she settled into the front seat, she didn't speak. Not yet. Ruth reached over and turned up the heat. "You're shaking," Ruth murmured, more observation than sympathy. "Not from the cold," Evelyn said, voice low. They sat in silence for a few minutes as Ruth pulled back onto Peña Boulevard, the airport already fading in the rearview mirror. "I raised that boy," Evelyn finally said. "I gave up vacations, paid for college, co-signed their house, helped him start that damn business. And today I was just baggage." "You're not baggage, Evie," Ruth said. "You're the freight train they're about to feel." Evelyn didn't smile, but her chin lifted slightly. "They said I slow them down." Her fingers tightened over her purse strap. "So I'm going to show them what slowing down really looks like." Ruth whistled low, impressed. "That's the Evelyn I remember from the credit union. Ice in your veins when it counts." The heater hummed between them. Evelyn turned her gaze to the snowy highway, her expression unreadable. "They don't even know what's in my name," she said softly. "They think leaving me was a shortcut." "And it was," Ruth added. "Straight to hell." They didn't laugh. Not yet. This wasn't the time for laughing. The silence returned, heavier now, the kind that follows betrayal too sharp to name. As the city skyline loomed ahead, Evelyn reached into her bag, pulled out a leather-bound folder and rested it on her lap. Ruth glanced at it, then at her. "What's that?" "The keys," Evelyn said. "To everything." And then, just as the light turned green, Evelyn turned, eyes cold, voice steady as stone. "They'll feel what slowing down really means." The next morning the storm had passed, but the cold had sharpened. The kind of dry Colorado chill that crept through windows and made hardwood floors feel like ice. Evelyn sat at the dining table in her modest 2-story house, The leather folder lay open in front of her like a crime scene, documents carefully fanned out, marked with pink tabs and decades of control no one thought she still held. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose, a mug of black coffee steamed beside her, untouched. Across from her, Ruth stirred her tea with deliberate slowness. She wasn't speaking. Not yet. "You know what this is?" Evelyn finally asked, not looking up. Ruth squinted at the pages. "It looks like your son just built an empire on your credit score." "On my name," Evelyn corrected. "My accounts, my assets, his business loans, lines of credit, collateral, all tied to me." "Page's Amex?" I co-signed. Her name was too weak for approval. Ruth let out a soft, humorless laugh. "They're living on your air, and they told you to wait at the curb." Evelyn finally took a sip of her coffee, lips steady. "They don't even realize I'm their air supply," she said. Ruth leaned forward. "So, what now?" Before Evelyn could answer, a soft chime echoed from her phone. She glanced down and pressed accept. The screen lit up with a calm, weathered face. Thomas Blake, vice president at First Mountain Financial, wearing a maroon sweater and half-rimmed glasses. His office was quiet, books lined neatly behind him. "Morning, Evelyn," he said. "I went through the records last night. Everything you suspected is accurate." Evelyn gave a short nod. "Do I still have controlling authorization?" "Full. You're the primary on every tied account, the startup's credit line, the commercial lease, even their car leases, co-signed under your guarantee." "They think they've made it," Evelyn murmured. Thomas's voice dropped slightly. "If you want to begin the freeze, I'll need formal instruction by end of day." "Send the forms," she said without hesitation. "Today." Thomas hesitated for just a breath. "You sure?" Evelyn looked straight at the camera. "I was left on a curb like I was dead weight. This isn't anger. It's oxygen control." He nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll email the documents shortly." As the call ended, Ruth whistled low. "You're not slapping back. You're pulling the damn plug." Evelyn began gathering the papers into a stack, her movements crisp. "They want the lifestyle. Let's see how they function without the scaffolding." "And what about Josh?" Ruth asked carefully. Evelyn paused for the first time. "He's young, still figuring out who he is. He hesitated yesterday, but he still followed them." "Fair," Ruth said. "But kids usually follow heat. Let's see how he moves when the temperature drops." The doorbell rang. Evelyn didn't move. "Thomas is mailing hard copies," she said absently. "That's probably him." She was wrong. When Ruth opened the door, there was a small package on the mat. No return label, just her name handwritten in neat, deliberate penmanship. Evelyn picked it up and opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a Montblanc pen, the same model Mark had gifted her years ago when he landed his first investor. A card was tucked inside, cream-colored, with a single line in block print. "Use it, however you need to." Josh. Evelyn stared at the card for a long time. Then she slid the pen from its case, rolled it between her fingers, and opened the cap. Ruth watched her sign the first freeze authorization form with steady precision. "You sure you're not cold?" Ruth asked. Evelyn didn't look up. "I'm colder than I've ever been." She slid the signed paper to the edge of the table, ink still wet, her voice even as stone. "Time to make them feel it." The smell of paper and lavender polish filled the small, warm office as Evelyn sat across from Karen Ellis, her longtime attorney. Framed diplomas and a shelf of tightly packed legal binders loomed behind the desk. But Karen herself was calm, focused, wire-rimmed glasses halfway down her nose, lips painted the same deep maroon they always were when she meant business. She flipped through the stack of documents Evelyn had handed her, her fingers moving quickly, eyes scanning each page like a detective at a fresh crime scene. "No independent access," Karen said finally, tapping a page. "Mark doesn't have a cent that's cleanly his. No power of attorney, no beneficiary rights that can't be revised. Even his business funding, all anchored to your credit." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I want a new trust." Karen arched an eyebrow. "I want it airtight," Evelyn continued. "No loose ends. Mark and Paige are out. Entirely." Karen leaned back in her chair and gave a small, approving nod. "You're not just cutting them off. You're erasing their fantasy." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She was staring out the window, watching traffic crawl by in the gray afternoon light. Her fingers moved gently over the edge of the desk, almost absently. Karen reached for a legal pad and began scribbling in long, efficient strokes. We'll create a revocable trust. Move every liquid and investment asset under it. I'll file amendments to the old will. We'll restructure the real estate and business holdings. Do you have someone in mind to designate? Evelyn's phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She pulled it out slowly, as though already expecting something, and saw a name she hadn't seen since the airport. Josh. The message was short. I'm sorry about what happened. I saw it all. I should have said something sooner. Evelyn stared at the screen. Her hand didn't tremble, but something inside her softened and rehardened in the same second. She locked the phone and slid it back into her pocket without replying. Make Josh the sole beneficiary, she said, but don't notify him. Not yet. Karen looked up from her notes, one brow raised. No alert? No alert, Evelyn said. He needs to get there on his own. Across the room, Ruth sat quietly in the corner, her legs crossed, watching the whole exchange like a hawk. She hadn't said much since they'd arrived, just listened, eyes scanning every word, as if making sure no weakness slipped through the cracks. Now, she finally spoke. Slow and steady, honey, she said gently. That's the lesson. Karen slid the paperwork across the desk, pointing to a series of tabs already marked in blue. These are the trust revisions. You sign, I file. We freeze accounts silently. No letters, no alerts. They'll try to swipe a card or write a check, and it'll be like the floor vanished beneath them. Evelyn picked up Josh's Mont Blanc pen from her purse, uncapped it with a soft click, and began to sign, page after page. No tremor in her wrist, no emotion in her face, just motion. Final signature complete. Karen gathered the stack and placed them into a lockbox. I'll walk them down to the courthouse myself. By Monday, they'll be legally iced out of everything. Ruth leaned forward. What happens if they come knocking before that? Evelyn met her gaze, firm and level. Let them knock. I won't open the door. The room fell silent except for the whisper of the space heater and the steady scratch of Karen's pen finalizing dates. Then Evelyn exhaled. One slow, measured breath. She stood, adjusted the collar of her coat, and reached for her gloves. As she buttoned the last one, she turned to Karen. If they want fire, they'll get frost. Karen looked up, impressed. Your son doesn't know what's coming. Evelyn's voice was flat. That's the point. The tablecloth was white linen, the wine deep red, and the laughter just a touch too loud. Mark raised his glass in a self-congratulatory toast, flashing his practiced, polished smile. Here's to growth, he said. Q4's gonna be our breakout. Around the private dining table at Pine and Marrow, one of downtown Denver's most exclusive steakhouses, 4 couples clinked their glasses. Investors, clients, people he needed to believe everything was still smooth and solvent. Paige leaned into him, her diamond studs catching the candlelight. And here's to visionaries, she added, letting the word roll like champagne in her mouth. You build. The rest just catch up. The waiter arrived with the bill nestled inside a sleek leather folio. Mark plucked his platinum Amex from his wallet with a little flourish and handed it over without breaking eye contact with the CFO seated across from him. 3 minutes passed. The waiter returned, eyes uneasy. Sir, I'm sorry. This card's been declined. Would you like to try another? Mark blinked once. That can't be right. He glanced at Paige. She smiled tightly, then turned to the waiter. Run it again. The waiter bowed slightly. Yes, ma'am. He disappeared. The air at the table shifted just slightly. Mark forced a light chuckle. Tech glitch. Happens more often than you'd think. Paige leaned in, voice like a hiss behind her smile. Did you forget a payment? Of course not, he muttered. Everything auto-debit. We're fine. The waiter returned, more cautious now. Sir, I tried twice. The card's been frozen. Would you like to split the bill with someone else at the table? Paige's face flushed crimson, half rage, half humiliation. A low murmur rippled among the guests. Mark stared at the waiter for a second too long, then pulled out a second card, a Visa tied to the business, handed it over, wordlessly. It cleared, barely. He didn't look at Paige again until they were outside, the valet scrambling in the cold to retrieve their Tesla. That was a disaster, she snapped, her stilettos clicking against the sidewalk like gunshots. I don't know what the hell happened, Mark muttered, pulling out his phone. I logged in this morning. Nothing was off. Paige snatched the phone from his hand. You know who this is, don't you? Your mother. She's sabotaging us. Mark stiffened. She wouldn't. Oh, she would, Paige hissed. You left her at an airport curb. You made her wait while we breezed through security like she didn't exist. You don't think she noticed? Mark didn't answer. His jaw clenched as he stared out into the snow-dusted street, lights reflecting off glass towers and slush. Back at home, across town, Evelyn sat curled up in a knit shawl by her living room window. The snowfall had picked up again, soft and steady now, blanketing the yard in perfect quiet. She stirred her cocoa slowly, methodically, steam curling up to fog the corners of her glasses. The fireplace crackled beside her, but she wasn't watching it. Her gaze was fixed on nothing in particular, the kind of stillness that only came from resolve fully settled. Ruth sat nearby, flipping idly through the latest Sunset magazine. Pretty snowfall tonight, she remarked. Reminds me of something. Evelyn didn't turn. What's that? Ruth smiled without looking up. Snow slows everyone. The corner of Evelyn's mouth curved just barely. Her phone buzzed on the end table. She picked it up. Karen. No greeting, just a single line. All freezes holding. No breaches. They're locked out. Evelyn stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Status? Ruth asked casually. Evelyn took a sip of cocoa. We just made our first move. Did it land? Evelyn finally looked away from the window. Her eyes were calm, but something sharp flickered beneath. It landed loud. The pounding on the front door came just after 9, loud, sharp, and angry. No doorbell, no pause. Evelyn didn't flinch. She folded the blanket on her lap with care, set her cocoa on a side table, and stood. Ruth looked up from the sofa, already bracing herself. You want me to handle it? Ruth asked. Evelyn shook her head once. Let him come through the storm. The door flew open before she reached it. Mark didn't wait for an invitation. You've lost your damn mind. He stormed inside, wet snowflakes clinging to the shoulders of his coat, his voice already shaking the walls. You froze my accounts? My business? You think this is some kind of lesson? Evelyn said nothing. He paced across her hardwood like he owned it, waving his arms like a man unraveling. You embarrassed me in front of clients. That dinner last night, do you know what that did to our credibility? Ruth stood slowly. You mean the card that got declined while you were toasting yourself? Mark ignored her. This was a partnership? He snapped. You backed me. You co-signed everything. You believed in me. Evelyn closed the door behind him gently. Then she turned. And what have you believed in, Mark? Her voice was level, not cold, not angry, just quiet enough to silence the room. Luxury? Control? Convenience? Because I don't see belief in people. I see leverage. Paige pushed in behind him now, wrapped in a fur-trimmed coat, sunglasses still on despite the dark. You're pathetic, she said to Evelyn, dropping her voice to a venomous whisper. Bitter, alone, and petty. You're going to die with nothing but a stack of paper and frostbite. Evelyn smiled, thin, dry. Then I'll still have more than you. Paige stepped forward, her tone now fully mocking. You think this gives you power? You're old, irrelevant. What are you going to do? Outlive us? Evelyn didn't blink. No, but I'll outlast you. Mark's fist slammed down on the kitchen counter, rattling a bowl of oranges. You want us to grovel? That it? Evelyn crossed the room slowly and stood just across from him. I want you to feel what I did, standing outside that terminal like a piece of excess luggage. He laughed once, sharp. That's what this is about? A guilt trip? Grow up, Mom. From the hallway, another voice came, softer. I saw it, Josh said. Everyone turned. He was standing at the edge of the living room, coat still on, his eyes heavy with conflict. I saw how you left her. I said nothing. That's on me, Paige scoffed. Oh, please. Don't grow a spine. Now Josh looked at her, then at his father, then finally at Evelyn. I'm sorry. I should have said something at the airport. I should have stayed. Mark stepped toward him. Josh, not now. No, Ruth cut in, voice sharper than it had been all night. Now's perfect. Everyone turned. Ruth moved toward the fireplace, reached into her tote bag, and pulled out a thick envelope. You didn't just insult her, Mark. You stole from her. She dropped the envelope onto the coffee table. We went back through the bank logs. A signature on a $400,000 line of credit? Dated 2 months ago? Evelyn's face didn't change. Karen had warned her about this possibility just that morning. The signature had been off. Too clean. Too fast. But Ruth had tracked it to the source. Mark's face drained of color. That loan doesn't exist, he muttered. I mean, not like that. Evelyn stepped closer, eyes locked on him. You forged my name to take out another loan. You used me. Again, Paige looked at Mark. Wait, you told me your mom approved it. She didn't, Ruth said flatly. But she will now. Just not the way you planned. Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then Evelyn turned to Josh. You said you saw everything. Now you'll see what it costs. The scan was projected on the wall in high resolution, Evelyn's signature, or something close enough to trick a bank, but not close enough to fool Thomas Blake. He stood stiffly behind his desk at First Mountain Financial's downtown branch, arms crossed, glasses low, his usually even temper cracking around the edges. This isn't hers, he said flatly. It mimics the flourish, but not the rhythm. Evelyn doesn't loop her G's, and her strokes are slower. This was done fast. The bank's internal fraud investigator, a woman in her early 30s with a precise ponytail and a quiet clipboard, nodded. Confirmed. Handwriting analysis returned yesterday. The signature's a fake, forged under the name Evelyn Grant for a $400,000 unsecured credit line, diverted to a shell business tied to her son. Thomas's jaw tightened, and he thought we wouldn't catch it. He walked to the window and stared out at the gray skyline, silent for a moment. Then he turned back. File the report. Code it red. I want it escalated before end of day. Back in the Grant house, Evelyn sat with Ruth at the kitchen table, the same spot where she'd signed the trust papers just days ago. Her teacup sat untouched. The light outside was cold and gray, clouds thick like cement. Paige paced across the living room, hair a mess, eyeliner smudged. $400,000? She snapped at Mark. You told me it was a bridge loan. Approved. Clean. Nothing to worry about. Mark sat slumped on the edge of the couch, eyes hollow, a duffel bag half-zipped beside him. I needed to keep payroll moving. I thought, once we closed the next investor, I could pay it back before anyone noticed. You thought, Paige spat, you thought you could just commit bank fraud and then fix it with charm? That was your plan? I had no choice. Yes, you did. Paige turned to Evelyn, pointing. You had a choice. She was your choice. Always has been. You just never respected the fact that your entire life is floating on her credit. Evelyn didn't move, her face calm, her breath steady. Snow covers tracks, Mark, she said, but it melts. Mark looked up at her, eyes bloodshot. Are you going to let them arrest me? I'm not letting anything happen, Evelyn replied. You already did. At her office, Karen Ellis moved like a scalpel, sharp, clean, precise. She had already filed the fraud report with the county district attorney, cross-referenced the bank record, and attached sworn statements from both Ruth and Thomas. Her printer spat out page after page, all clipped and sorted into a case binder labeled Grant, Mark, Unauthorized Signature, Financial Fraud, Elder Abuse. She clicked send on the final email to the district office, her expression blank. Then she leaned back and said softly to no one, he's going to learn what silence sounds like in court. Later that evening, as the wind howled outside Evelyn's windows and ice slicked the edges of her porch, Ruth poured 2 glasses of port and handed one across the table. She raised hers in a toast, casual, almost light. To delay, Ruth said. He rushed you through every holiday, every conversation, every meal. Now the only speed he'll know is waiting for arraignment. Evelyn let the glass linger near her lips before sipping. Let the court system teach him patience. Ruth smirked. Delayed gratification, just like you taught him, back when he actually listened. Evelyn's phone buzzed on the table again. Another message from Josh. Do you need me to go on record? With the signature? I'll do it. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. Then she typed just one word in response. Soon. The sun was barely up, and already voices were rising in the glass-walled office suite of Grant Core Ventures. Sasha, the operations manager, stood frozen in front of her desktop monitor, one hand over her mouth. All payroll accounts are locked, she said quietly, almost to herself. In the adjacent room, Chase from accounts was already on speakerphone with the bank. I'm telling you, it's a mistake, he said, his voice climbing. This is a company account. Mark Grant is the managing partner. Yes, I understand authorization protocols, but wait, did you just say fraud alert? Phones began to buzz. Emails came in by the dozen. Vendors demanding past due invoices. contractors threatening to walk. One of the junior associates picked up his phone, dialed his wife, and whispered, "Yeah, might want to hold off on that down payment." In his glass-walled corner office, Mark sat behind his desk in silence, elbows on his knees, staring at his phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled through banking apps. Each login met with the same chilling message: account access temporarily restricted. Please contact your financial institution. The door burst open. Paige stood there, breath fogging, eyes wild. "You said it was handled," she snapped. "You said the trust was tied up legally. That Karen couldn't move it without notice." Mark didn't look up. "She did. You told me we'd be liquid by the end of this week. That the second investor was soft committed. He pulled out." Paige's mouth dropped open. "You didn't tell me that." Mark stood now, slowly, every movement like a man climbing out of cement. He saw the headlines. "He's not touching us until this clears." Paige laughed, sharp, humorless. "You mean, until your mother clears it." She turned and slammed the door behind her so hard the blinds shivered in their metal frames. Across town, Evelyn sat in her favorite chair by the fireplace, robe wrapped tight, watching a muted news segment on her old TV. A banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Tech startup CEO under investigation for financial misconduct. Possible family ties to elder abuse case." The newscaster's tone was careful, clinical. Just enough outrage to stir interest, just enough distance to stay clean. Evelyn took a slow sip of tea. "She looks so calm," the anchorwoman remarked, gesturing to an image of Evelyn exiting the courthouse earlier that week. The screen flashed back to Mark, exiting a downtown office building, face downcast, flanked by reporters. Paige was a blur behind him, shielding her face from the flash of cameras. Ruth, seated on the opposite end of the sofa, nudged the remote closer to Evelyn. "Want me to mute it?" Evelyn shook her head once. "Let it run." A knock came at the door. This one gentle, patient. Ruth opened it and stepped aside. Josh entered, looking older than he had a week ago. Less polished, more aware. He held a manila folder in one hand. His face wasn't tense, just determined. "I printed the texts," he said. "The ones Dad sent me. Before the forgery. I didn't reply to most, but they show his mindset. Pressure. Desperation. Might help if you need corroboration." Evelyn took the folder but didn't open it. She studied his face instead. "You don't have to pick sides," she said. "I already did," he replied. He sat down beside her, glancing at the screen where his parents' images flickered between stock footage and scandal. "Do you hate him?" Josh asked quietly. "No," Evelyn said, "but I'm not saving him either." Josh nodded. "If you want me to testify, I will. Whatever it takes." She turned to him now, really looking. "You don't owe me that." "I do," he said, without flinching. "For the airport. For not stopping them. For waiting until the cameras told me what I should have seen with my own eyes." Evelyn rested her hand gently over his. "This," she said, nodding toward the news. "This is only the beginning." The front desk of the Denver Police Department was lined with the usual flyers, mugs, a box of candy canes no one touched. But it felt sterile, heavy. Evelyn stood in front of the intake officer, a young man barely older than Josh, with nervous eyes and a clean-pressed uniform. She handed over the envelope with deliberate calm. Inside were documents, copies of forged forms, transaction logs, account withdrawals, and one blurry receipt from a pawn shop in Arvada. "I'm here to report a theft," she said evenly. The officer glanced inside the envelope, then up at her. "From your son?" "No," Evelyn said. "From me." "By my son?" He blinked, then stood a little straighter. "We'll need to escalate this to financial crimes," he said. "Do you mind waiting?" "I've waited long enough," Evelyn replied. But she sat. Back at her office, Karen Ellis was already building the architecture of war. She'd opened a new case binder, Grant versus Grant, elder abuse and misappropriation. Her screen was split in thirds. Bank statements on the left, pawn shop surveillance footage in the middle, and a Google Maps location tracker on the right, showing Mark's Tesla parked outside a storefront the day Evelyn's diamond heirloom bracelet vanished from her dresser. She dialed a contact in the DA's office. "I'll need a subpoena for Grant Corps' internal emails and one for Aztec Pawn on Colfax. Timestamp, January 9th, 3:24 p.m. The woman on the other end sighed. "That's a hell of a thing, Karen. Elder abuse case?" Karen didn't blink. They used her like an ATM with no PIN. The interrogation room was brighter than Paige expected, and colder. She sat on the metal chair like it offended her, arms crossed, wearing a turtleneck too tight for the tension in her neck. Detective Rhodes slid the photo across the table. Mark standing inside the pawn shop holding Evelyn's bracelet in his left hand. The security camera timestamp blazed in the corner. Paige's mouth opened, then closed. She looked away. "You were with him that day," the detective said. "Security footage has you in the Tesla out front. You told your assistant you were doing estate errands." Paige's jaw clenched. "I didn't know what he was doing." "You didn't ask?" "He said he was taking care of something for his mother," she snapped. "I thought it was legal." "And the forged line of credit?" Rhodes asked. Her face flushed. "That wasn't me." "No, it was your husband. But the funds ended up in a joint account you accessed to pay for a cosmetic procedure 4 days later." Paige looked down at the table. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Can I talk to my lawyer?" That evening, the sky over Denver turned a strange pink as snow began falling again in delicate, windless flakes. Evelyn and Ruth sat on the porch, bundled in wool coats and blankets, watching the neighborhood grow silent. Under fresh powder, Evelyn held the police report in her lap. Official now. Stamped. Logged. In motion. "You sure you want to see this all the way through?" Ruth asked, sipping hot cider. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She was watching the lights flicker in the distance, likely from the news trucks outside Paige and Mark's gated neighborhood. "They wanted me quiet," she said finally. "They'll hear me in every court from here to Boulder." Ruth gave a dry chuckle. "That slap you took at the airport?" Evelyn turned to her, one eyebrow raised. Ruth grinned. "It echoes louder now." They clinked mugs softly. Ruth looked pleased. "Where's Josh tonight?" she asked. "Home," Evelyn said. "He needed space. The more he watches, the clearer the lines get." Ruth nodded. "He's figuring out who's worth following." Evelyn took another sip of cider, the heat blooming through her chest. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. A single message. Mark Grant scheduled for formal arraignment. Bail hearing set. It started with a headline, clean, clinical, but charged like dry air before a storm. Prominent tech CEO under investigation for defrauding elderly parents. Then came the local segment on Channel 7. Footage showed Mark stepping out of the courthouse in a dark overcoat flanked by his attorney. The clip looped twice on the evening news, first wide, then zoomed in on his face. Red eyes, pale lips, a man unraveling by inches. The anchor's voice didn't waver. Sources close to the family confirm that 74-year-old Evelyn Grant, a retired credit union manager, was the legal guarantor on multiple accounts tied to her son's business ventures. Investigators allege those funds were misused without her knowledge or consent. By morning, it was viral. On Twitter, clips of Mark's courtroom footage floated between memes and outrage threads. At Court Watch Colorado, wealthy tech bro steals from his own mom and wants sympathy? No, sir. Let the cuffs click at Justice Dad 98. My mom used to clip coupons to feed me. If I ever did what Mark Grant did, I'd expect her to run me over with the station wagon. Twice, even TikTok had Evelyn's moment stitched into posts. Her silent walk out of the courthouse in a long gray coat, head held high, becoming a kind of folk heroine for dignity. Across town, Evelyn sat quietly at her kitchen table, the television off for once. The press was swarming now. Calls came hourly. Producers, journalists, bloggers. She answered none. She sliced an apple, slow and precise, each piece laid on a blue china plate. Beside it sat a stack of unopened letters, legal notices, media requests, even a letter from someone claiming to be her distant cousin. Ruth leaned in from the hallway. "You want me to throw those into the fireplace for you?" Evelyn didn't look up. "Stack them. The ones that smell like desperation always go to the bottom." Mark's company was finished. 2 investors had officially withdrawn. One issued a statement citing a failure of ethical leadership. Another, more bluntly, if he'll steal from his mother, he'll steal from anyone. His name was quietly removed from several advisory boards. At a nearby grocery store, Paige stood in the produce aisle, sunglasses on, trying to ignore the 2 women whispering near the tomatoes. I always thought she was cold," one murmured. "Cold?" The other replied. "She iced her own mother-in-law out of Christmas dinner last year. You don't do that unless your heart is a marble." As Paige reached for an avocado, a teen girl passed by, phone held high, recording. Paige froze. The girl smiled sweetly. Hey, you're the lady from TikTok, right? The one who left the grandma at the airport? Paige turned, left her cart, and walked straight out of the store. That evening, Josh knocked on Evelyn's door again. He looked tired, but resolute. Just say the word, he said. I'll testify. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. I'll let you know when it's time, she said. But thank you. As he sat down, Ruth handed him a glass of water and raised an eyebrow. You know, what's funny, kid? She said. The crowd turned. For years they rushed around, never noticed the one holding everything together. Now they're the slow ones, scrambling, confused. Josh nodded. Feels like they're chasing after a bus that's already pulled away. Ruth smiled. Exactly. Across town, a silent transaction moved through the county assessor's office. A small, quiet trust, Red Birch Holdings, LLC, submitted an all-cash purchase for the recently foreclosed home at 212 Alder Creek Lane. The title was transferred. The deed notarized. Ownership changed hands without a whisper of Evelyn's name. The Grant family home was no longer theirs, and they didn't even know. Not yet. The knock came just after 8 a.m. Sharp, rhythmic, official. Mark opened the door in sweatpants, bleary-eyed, hair unwashed. Paige hovered in the background wearing a satin robe and an expression permanently twisted by dread. The man on the porch wore a beige windbreaker and held a clipboard. Mr. Grant? He asked, tone neutral. Yes, Mark said, instantly alert. You've been served. The man handed over a thick packet and stepped back without another word. Behind him, a plain white van idled at the curb, hazard lights blinking in slow rhythm. Two uniformed movers were already unloading folding crates onto the sidewalk. What the hell is this? Mark barked, flipping through the papers. Notice of eviction. Effective immediately filed by Red Birch Holdings, LLC. Reason: non-payment and breach of trust terms. Paige stormed forward. This is our home. We've lived here for 12 years. The mover didn't even look at her. We don't set the terms, ma'am. We just enforce them. By mid-morning, the driveway of 212 Alder Creek Lane was chaos. Neighbors watched from their windows, pretending not to. Some peeked over fences. Others stood in the cold with coffee cups, masks of concern hiding undeniable curiosity. A local news van pulled up just as Paige emerged onto the porch, face blotchy, voice shrill. You can't do this, she yelled. This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer. A camera rolled. Mark stood in the yard, eyes hollow, as their furniture was boxed, labeled, and stacked like expired inventory. A single framed photo of Josh's graduation fell out of a cracked bin and hit the grass with a dull thud. That was the moment it hit him. He dropped to sit on the front steps, fingers laced, watching the house be emptied like a mouth losing teeth. Across town, Evelyn watched it unfold on mute. The news segment showed Paige waving her arms at the camera. Mark slumped beside a potted plant, surrounded by cardboard misery. A reporter's voiceover gave the summary. Foreclosure, fraud investigation, public unraveling. Ruth sat beside her, swirling a cinnamon stick in her coffee. Tables turned, she said simply. Evelyn didn't reply. Her eyes were on the window, where a light snow was beginning to fall again, soft, steady, unbothered by human drama. That night, Josh stood at the threshold of Evelyn's house, a backpack over one shoulder. You sure? He asked. I don't want to bring any of their mess here. Evelyn stepped aside and held the door open. Then don't bring it in. He walked in slowly, the kind of slow that comes from shedding weight. She gestured toward the upstairs guest room. It's yours until you want it not to be. He nodded, throat thick. Thanks, Grandma. As he walked past her, she added, Shoes off. I raised your father wrong. You get a second chance. Josh laughed. It was the first real laugh in days. Later, Ruth poured a celebratory splash of bourbon into 2 teacups and raised one toward Evelyn. To slow revenge, she said. Evelyn clinked her cup gently. Strongest kind. They drank in silence. No toast, no theatric, only the sound of fire crackling and the snowfall thickening outside the window. Evelyn stared at the flames for a long moment, her voice barely above a whisper. They left me on the curb because I slowed them down, she said. Now they can't move without tripping over themselves. Ruth gave a low chuckle. Funny thing about foundations? When they rot, the whole house falls. Evelyn smiled. Just wait, she said. The dust hasn't even settled yet. Karen Ellis flipped the final page of the revised trust with practiced fingers, then looked across her mahogany desk at Evelyn. This document supersedes all previous versions. It's notarized, witnessed, and state compliant, she said, tapping the page with her pen. Once I file it, it's done. Permanent. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her gloved hands rested in her lap, her coat still on, as if she intended to be in and out without making a dent in the furniture. Her face was composed, her chin lifted just slightly. File it, she said. Karen nodded. Josh will be the sole heir. Personal property, investment accounts, the house. He'll have full executor power. As we discussed, Mark and Paige are formally excluded. No clauses, Evelyn added. No appeals. Karen pulled out a sleek stamp and pressed it into the lower margin of the final page with a soft click. Then she slid the documents into a secure file sleeve and sealed it shut. It's done. Evelyn let out a breath. Not relief, not triumph, just release. Later that day, the reading happened at Karen's office. Not because Evelyn owed it to anyone, but because there was something clarifying about formality. Mark arrived late, his blazer wrinkled, his eyes sunken. Paige came in wearing oversized sunglasses and an overcompensating trench coat, her lips tight, her movements jittery like someone trying too hard to look unaffected. Josh was already there, sitting beside Evelyn, calm but alert. Karen stood behind her desk with the trust packet in hand. This is a courtesy reading, she began. Legally, I'm not required to do this with all parties present. But Evelyn requested clarity. She opened the folder and began reading from the revised will. Her voice was clean and dry, like snow sliding off a roof. I, Evelyn Louise Grant, being of sound mind and legal capacity, designate Joshua Mark Grant as the sole inheritor of my estate, including all titled property, holdings, and financial accounts. All previous versions of this will are rendered null and void. She continued, each line a quiet knife. Mark looked up sharply. What is this? Karen didn't pause. Mark and Paige Grant are explicitly excluded from inheritance, financial power of attorney, and executorship in perpetuity. Wait, excluded? Paige's voice cracked into a sharp, bitter laugh. You can't be serious. Josh stiffened. Evelyn did not move. She's doing this now? Paige spat. After everything we've lost, after you've already humiliated us in public, you're taking this too? Evelyn turned her gaze to Paige. Her voice was almost gentle. You took what wasn't yours. I'm just putting it back. Paige's composure shattered. You bitter. Old. Karen stepped in. That's enough. This is a legal meeting, not a family drama. Paige rose from her chair so quickly it scraped across the hardwood. You think this will make you feel powerful? You think freezing us out will fix what you broke? Evelyn's voice was calm. I didn't break anything. I just stopped holding it up. Mark looked at her for a long moment, expression unreadable. But he said nothing. When Paige finally stormed out, her heels echoed down the hall with a fury that couldn't outrun consequence. Josh stood, unsure whether to speak. Evelyn looked at him. The paperwork is yours now. You don't owe me loyalty. You owe yourself character. He nodded slowly. I'll do right by it. Karen handed him a copy of the notarized packet. Keep this somewhere safe. You're the future of the Grant name now, Ruth. Waiting in the hallway stood as they emerged. She didn't ask what happened. She just handed Evelyn her gloves and said, The slow burn's complete. Evelyn didn't smile. Not exactly, but there was something calm about the way she stood, like a storm that had finally exhausted itself. Outside, snow had begun falling again, thin, steady lines across the windshield. Evelyn turned to Ruth, quiet but sure. One more move. The courthouse steps were slick with melting snow as the reporters gathered again, fewer this time, but sharper. Their questions came faster, less theatrical now. No need for drama when the facts alone drew blood. Mark, how do you respond to the indictment? Did you forge your mother's signature for the loan? Are you cooperating with the DA's office? Mark didn't answer. He kept his eyes down, jaw clenched, walking just behind his lawyer like a man pacing toward execution. No longer the polished CEO, no tailored coat, no press team, just a once golden name now rusted and dragging behind him like chains. The formal charges were read in courtroom 4C just after noon. Felony count 1, bank fraud. Felony count 2, forgery of financial documents. Felony count 3, elder exploitation and abuse. Each word echoed across the gallery with no need for embellishment. Back at Evelyn's house, the snow fell in soft diagonal streaks outside the bay window. She stirred honey into her tea slowly, watching it dissolve into golden clouds. She didn't turn up the volume when the courtroom feed played on the television. She didn't need to hear it again. She already knew every step of the damage. She'd just chosen not to look away from it. Karen called after the hearing. "It's done," she said. "The DA's moving ahead with full prosecution. No deals." Evelyn didn't ask for confirmation. She just listened. "Justice is permanent now," Karen added. "You changed the whole arc of this case. Most victims don't fight back this far." "I wasn't fighting back," Evelyn said. "I was correcting the record." In a downtown boutique, Paige stood alone near the back dressing room, phone pressed to her ear. No one was answering. Not her mother. Not her old college friend who ran the wine fundraiser. Not the last interior design client she'd tried to keep. A sales clerk walked past her slowly, pointedly ignoring her. The headlines had followed her like perfume. Paige Grant silent as husband faces charges. Socialite or silent partner? What did she know? She reached for a silk scarf, then thought better of it and left the store without buying anything. Her name no longer opened doors. It just stained them. That night, Josh came home later than usual. He looked tired but brighter, like someone slowly returning to the surface after a long dive. Evelyn was in the kitchen, sealing up leftovers. He set his backpack down, looked at her for a moment longer than usual, and said, "I know this wasn't easy." She gave him a soft, measured glance. "No, but it was necessary." Josh hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged her, tighter than he ever had before. "Thank you," he said into her shoulder. Evelyn didn't hug him back right away, but then her arms closed around him, steady, strong, slow. "For what?" she asked. "For protecting me, and for showing me what dignity looks like when it's had enough." Ruth, standing in the doorway with her usual bourbon and a bowl of popcorn, raised her glass like a slow clap. "Well," she said, "revenge cooked just right." Josh gave a small laugh and wiped at his eyes. Evelyn stepped away and adjusted his collar. "No more apology, just action." He nodded. "Action it is." Later that night, Evelyn stood at her window again, the one facing the backyard where the trees stood black against the snowy sky. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't mourning. She was just still. All the noise, legal, financial, emotional, had finally quieted. And in the silence, there was weight. Not relief. Something heavier, but cleaner. Ruth stepped beside her, mug in hand. "You thinking about the beginning?" Evelyn didn't turn. "No." She let the silence sit. "I'm thinking about what comes next." The atrium at Denver Civic Hall had never looked warmer. Soft gold light bathed the high ceilings, and a quiet buzz filled the space as reporters, local educators, and community leaders took their seats beneath a banner that read, "The Evelyn Grant Foundation, investing in the ones they forgot." Josh stood at the podium, dressed in a navy blazer and charcoal slacks that Ruth had ironed herself that morning. His voice was steady, stronger than it had been in months. "We talk a lot about ambition," he said, "but we don't talk enough about access. My grandmother believed in giving silently. She believed in helping people who don't have a seat at the table, yet." Behind him, a slideshow cycled gently through images, students in classrooms, food banks, a small community college in Greeley with a smiling sophomore who'd just been told her tuition was covered for the next 2 years. Evelyn sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap, her pearl earrings the only shine on her frame. Karen and Ruth flanked her, both wearing black, both watching her more than the stage. "She really did it," Ruth whispered. "She turned ashes into roots." By noon, the press had taken hold. Evelyn Grant, from exploited matriarch to civic force. Quiet billionaire fund scholarships in wake of family fraud scandal. Dignity with teeth. The woman who refused to be forgotten. The tone had shifted. She was no longer just the mother of a disgraced tech executive. She was something bigger, something the public needed, proof that consequences could yield something clean. And her next move sealed it. The press release was issued through Karen's office and picked up by 3 national outlets within the hour. Denver Airport to open new senior assistance program, funded anonymously by local philanthropists. It was clean, minimal, no quotes, but Evelyn's fingerprint was unmistakable. $1.4 million allocated to cover in-terminal escorts, wheelchair services, language support for seniors, and weather-protected drop-off stations at every major entrance. No plaque, no ceremony, no name etched in glass, just function. Josh walked into the living room holding the press release. You could have told me. Evelyn looked up from her crossword puzzle, unbothered. Why? I could have bragged about it in the speech, he said with a grin. She folded the newspaper slowly and set it aside. Legacy isn't for bragging, it's for planting. Josh sat beside her and nodded. Still, I'm proud. Ruth walked in from the hallway, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. You okay? Josh asked. I'm fine, Ruth sniffled. Just never seen something built so beautifully out of broken pieces. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. That's my speed. Meanwhile, Mark sat in a borrowed studio apartment on the east side of town, watching the live stream on a cracked iPad. His court date loomed 3 weeks out. No job, no reputation, no phone calls that weren't from attorneys or debt collectors. He watched Josh read from the podium, watched the crowd clap, watched Evelyn's stillness. There was no anger in his face anymore, just distance, like the whole thing had happened to someone else, like his name had been peeled off the story entirely. And it had. Paige, now living in her sister's basement in Littleton, stared at the same clip with her arms crossed, an untouched glass of rosé sweating on the table beside her. Matriarch, she muttered, please. But no one replied. The room was empty. Online, she couldn't post anymore without sarcastic replies piling in. You slowing anyone down today, Paige? Maybe Evelyn can start a charm school. You should enroll. Your silence is the only classy thing you've ever done. She logged off and stayed off. That evening, Evelyn and Ruth sat on the back porch in near silence, listening to the wind rustling bare trees. Ruth lifted her mug. You know, I thought revenge was a final chapter, but you wrote a whole second book. Evelyn didn't smile. She just said, one more chapter. Ruth cocked her head. What's left? Evelyn looked toward the snowy sky, her voice soft, steady. The airport. The concourse smelled of new carpet and optimism. Denver International Airport's South Terminal was buzzing with quiet activity, press badges flashing, families moving around politely, airport employees lining the polished tile in navy windbreakers and white gloves. At the center of the crowd stood a wide banner over Gate 9 that read, The Grant Passage, Senior Assistance Hub. Just beneath it, a row of pristine wheelchairs waited like chariots, attendants standing tall beside each one. Volunteers in orange vests helped position elderly passengers near heated benches and bright signage. This was no charity corner. This was infrastructure. Evelyn stood in the middle of it all, wearing a soft gray coat and pearl gloves, her hair tucked neatly under a beret. She looked less like a philanthropist and more like someone who had come to claim quiet ownership of an unfinished moment. Beside her, Josh adjusted the sleeves of his suit jacket. He looked around, soaking it in. The press, the airport buzz, the distant beeping of a baggage cart. They're saying it's the largest privately funded senior mobility program in any U.S. airport, he murmured. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched an older woman, mid-80s, silver curls tucked under a beanie, be helped into a chair by a soft-spoken. The woman smiled, nodded thanks, and was rolled toward security with dignity intact. Evelyn finally turned. That's the moment. Right there, a city official stepped forward, holding a microphone. We'd like to take a moment to thank the anonymous donor whose vision made this possible. But that donor asked for a simple compromise. No spotlight, just a seat at the ribbon. She nodded toward Evelyn. Applause broke out. Gentle, then louder, until the entire terminal echoed with it. A few travelers, unaware of the context, clapped too, sensing something meaningful had just occurred. Josh stepped forward and offered his elbow. Evelyn took it. The ribbon was cut with golden shears and no fanfare. Just a small group of city leaders, airport staff, volunteers, and Evelyn. Ruth, standing off to the side with a cocoa in hand and a lopsided scarf, gave a long whistle. Look at this, she said. Now no grandma gets left behind. Josh laughed. We should get that printed on t-shirts. Evelyn gave the smallest smile, but in her eyes something shimmered, emotion held firm, but present. I was standing right there, she said quietly, nodding toward the curb beyond the glass doors. When they left me? When they didn't look back, Josh followed her gaze. Now, in that exact spot, an overhang with radiant heaters stood ready to shield seniors from the weather. Two assistants with clipboards waited for the next arriving shuttle. Not one more person will feel like luggage, she said. Ruth stepped beside them, quiet now. You didn't build this out of revenge. Evelyn looked at her. I didn't? No. Ruth tilted her head. You built this out of survival, then turned it into grace. The three of them stood silently as a small child nearby offered his seat to an elderly woman, unprompted. Josh leaned close. You know what you did today, right? What's that? You redefined what slowing down looks like. As the ceremony wound down and guests filtered back into the terminal, Evelyn walked once more to the edge of the curb. Same place, same slope in the concrete, but not the same woman. This time, a staff member in an airport blazer offered her a chair, mistaking her for a passenger. She held up a hand. I'm good. Just watching. The staffer nodded and walked away. Evelyn stood under the overhang, looking out at the falling snow, her breath warm against the cold air. She closed her eyes for one full moment, not to relive, but to reclaim. Then she turned back toward the terminal. Inside, someone called her name, but it wasn't Mark. It was a flight attendant. Ma'am, she said, smiling. You're Evelyn Grant, right? We just named a gate corridor after you. Evelyn paused. Then she stepped forward slowly, voice calm, proud. Now that's my gate. The living room was dim but warm, lit by soft lamplight and the flicker of a small fire in the hearth. Outside, Denver was blanketed again, thick white snow falling slow and soundless, coating rooftops like memory. A modest Christmas tree stood in the corner, strung with white lights and a few careful ornaments. No flashy star on top. Just a pine cone Evelyn had lacquered and hung herself years ago. Josh sat cross-legged on the floor, wrapping the last of the gifts in old newspaper comics. We seriously didn't need to do presents, he said. Ruth sipped spiced cider from a wide ceramic mug. We seriously didn't need to invite you, she quipped, back. Evelyn smiled faintly from her armchair. She's been punchy since noon. I blame the bourbon in her cocoa. I blame the freedom, Ruth said. No in-laws, no fake smiles, no pretending Mark's latest hustle is something to be proud of. Josh chuckled and placed the final wrapped bundle under the tree. Quiet Christmas, he said. Feels good. Evelyn looked toward the window, where flakes danced in wind gusts, sometimes swirling sideways. This is the first year, she said quietly, where I haven't flinched at silence. Josh stood and walked to the fireplace. He crouched to adjust a log, then looked over at her. Do you miss it? The chaos? She considered the question longer than he expected. No, she said, but I remember it. Every moment she leaned back in her chair. The terminal, the sound of tires rolling away, my hands shaking in the cold. That moment, they thought it would fade, that I'd forget. Josh sat beside her now, hands resting loosely in his lap. But you didn't. I couldn't. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. Betrayal doesn't erase, but it can reroute. Ruth leaned forward, her voice softer now. You turned every bruise into structure. That house, the trust, the airport. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. Evelyn nodded. I didn't want to destroy him, just stop shrinking for him. A long silence settled over the room. Then Ruth stood and moved to the kitchen. She returned a moment later with 3 champagne flutes, filled not to the brim, just enough to mean something. I know we're more cider and coffee types, she said, handing them out. But this is for what doesn't come around twice. They each took a glass. Josh raised his. To never being left behind again. They clinked. Evelyn took a slow sip, then another. She set her glass down gently and looked around the room. No grandeur, no excess, but it felt fuller than any luxury home she'd ever walked through. She looked at Josh. You were quiet for a long time, even when you saw. He nodded. Guilty. But you came back, she added. Not for me, for your own spine. Josh smiled faintly. You're the strongest passenger I know. Ruth gave a theatrical sniff. If this turns into a Hallmark commercial, I'm spiking everyone's drink again. They laughed together. The kind that came easy now. No defense, no tension underneath. The fire crackled. The tree lights blinked in soft rhythm. Then the silence came again. Not cold, just still. Evelyn leaned her head against the armchair and closed her eyes for a moment. She could see the map of everything that had unfolded. Each moment of betrayal, each decision, each delayed but deliberate move. From curbside abandonment to courtroom thunder. From silence to snow. She opened her eyes again. Ruth stood at the window now, watching the flakes fall. Josh adjusted the logs one last time, and Evelyn reached for her glass again, lifting it one final time. Her voice was low, measured, timeless. My son left me at the airport. I left him frozen while I took off.